Let me ask you this. What I'm curious about is a lot of the people, I assume, in the Kalia community who are here in the stream or who are watching, they use the phrase Lolbertarian a lot. What would you say, like, for the people who want to comment on this, what would you say is the thing that turns a lot of you guys off of libertarianism? And Anarchy Ball, I'd be very interested for your input on this as well.
Oh, I can tell you right off the bat, it's the autism, right? If you're not used to people repeating phrases and bobbing back and forth as they do so, you are not going to get into libertarianism. We are, I would pride myself on being the most autistic in the internet community. We say the same things over and over again, and we don't understand that real human experiences count for something. Right. So when we deal with communists who have had a bad childhood, we don't try to address any of the needs that they're actually communicating with us. We try to belittle them and call them names and call them mass murderers and all the rest of this stuff in an attempt to virtue signal to all the rest of our tribe. And in a lot of ways, that's what has made me popular because, you know, if you've seen the Anarchy Ball comics, that is my modus operandi. But at the same time, you have to understand, I can see past it myself. It's you know, I've been in the game long enough to see past it. So I see a lot of people who call themselves ANCOMs as expressing a need. And if there was a way to address that need in the market, I feel like they would be more open to market solutions. And in a lot of ways, that's what happens with communism, is communists will see a need in a market that is not being addressed. They will come up with their own solutions that don't involve any sort of exchange of value, just an exchange of belief. And then they'll present that solution as if it's the end-all be-all of existence without taking into account any of the stages of production or anything else. And then you'll have another not real communism solution. So I've sort of taken a different tack in a number of ways. I think that if you can connect with them on their concerns and just ignore the differences for a while, they'll respect you more for doing so. And if you can do that, then you can grow as partners instead of as opponents, right? Because they'll respect you more if you're not focusing on their obvious flaws, because their stepdads all focus on all of their obvious flaws, and that's what made them an opponent. Right?
About libertarians, someone commented in the stream that they would rather discuss epiphilia than other. Like, they're very adamant on epiphilia.
What the fuck is epiphilia?
Oh my god.
It's when you like little girls, my dude.
Jesus Christ.
It's when you're attracted to 14-year-old girls.
It's not.
They're not kids, okay? They're teens.
They're not kids.
There were three of those on the last episode. Should have been there.
There's a very small aspect. The maps. Have you heard of maps? You know,
wasn't that like a hoax or something? Like,
no, that was a real fucking operation, right? These maps tried to take over anarcho-capitalism, and a lot of people tried to push back against them. And then we ended up getting a lot of flack in terms of, see, when you're enemies with somebody in libertarianism, they'll always try to befriend the enemies of your enemies so that they can get some sort of clout out of it, right? So there was a lot of maps that had expressly said that they want to fuck 12-year-olds in their Discord groups. And so other ANCAPs and anarchists in general had called them out on that shit. And so then right-wing libertarians, who are the most anti-pedophile, decided to flip over because they hated the other people who were trying to make inroads with the left anarchist crowd, flipped over, and now they became pro-map. Or pro, and so it's like, what the fuck is going on? But no, pedophiles, like let's say Hakeem Bey. Do we know about Hakeem Bey?
Mm-hmm.
Wait, who's Hakeem Bey?
He invented the concept of autonomous zones.
Yes, he invented the concept of autonomous zones in his book of poetry essays, and then he founded NAMBLA, and I'm pretty sure everybody knows what NAMBLA here is.
Yeah, I'm a proud member.
Yikes.
All I want to say about this is unregulated child market.
Unregulated child markets are best regulated by parents with shotguns and wood chippers.
I can't wait for the suburban yoga mom death squads.
Suburban yoga. We need a suburban yoga mom GF thread right now on Twitter.
Right now, it's coming up.
And by the way, when people say the word maps, I always imagine the pizza-shaped map from that email that was leaked of John Podesta.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I forgot my map at your pizza party.
That's so fucking weird, right? Now, these people aren't anarchists. How come we always get the flack when the most heavily politically connected group of people in the world are out there talking in code about fucking kids? How come anarchists get that shit?
Because they're just untouchable at this point to the normal man. Like they have reached such an elevated status because of the capitalistic society that we exist in, that they've become untouchable. They are gods. We can't interfere with what they do. That's why they do what they do. That's why they put this shit out into the public. Now, this sounds very tip of the iceberg, kind of rhetoric, everyone would know by now, but that's why they put this shit out there, just do this shit in public, because it's to mock everyone who just doesn't get it. And it's if you do get it, you're called crazy.
That goes back to the dispassionate versus the passionate individuals,
exactly.
Right? What they're trying to do is they're trying to establish their dominance by just not giving a fuck.
Yeah.
But also, it's such an extreme thing that people would choose to not even talk about it, not even to consider it, and that in a way acts as a shield from discussion about the topic in general.
Well, how could we not? Look, the biggest stories of our time have been Epstein not killing himself and what's her face, Ghislaine Maxwell getting arrested. Now, these are very important, prominent people in our times that have suddenly become public spectacles because of their fucking touching of kids. Now, not only that, but they're very, very connected with Israel, I might add. And so you really have to wonder how much of this is organized crime, how much of this is government, and how much is there a crossover between the two. And when you come to those conclusions, you have to realize that maybe government depends on its ability to coerce kleptocrats, right? That's what government is. If you can coerce kleptocrats, you have a government. And that's sort of like the ancient understanding of government. That's the Egyptian understanding of government. As long as you can coerce kleptocrats into becoming respectable by teaming up with a different kind of gang, then you've got a state.
But there's all kinds of different levels here too. System.
Yeah, sort of.
Like, I'm still going to pick the best out of the worst here as far as the kind of system we're going to be under. I know that all the intelligence agencies are going to be full of criminals and crooks and people who are going to do things that are going to make most sane people blush at the least. So it's something that is concerning, but at the same time, there are all kinds of corrupt regimes out there where just being a civilian is going to make it, it's going to be a lot tougher than living here.
Give me Ghislaine Maxwell's mugshot. I'd like to see her mugshot.
They didn't even charge her for the things that were in the indictment. That's the important thing to notice here.
If this year keeps going as it is, I'm gonna go Joker mode. I'm gonna go kooky.
In Minecraft.
And, in a lot of ways.
In Minecraft, in Roblox.
Being Joker in Roblox Minecraft is really the only solution at this point, because we're facing just a massive fucking criminal organization that's coming down on everybody. And a lot of people are coming to that realization. They're doing it very much slower than the establishment is moving. That's a big problem, right? But once you come to that realization, then it's like, well, what the fuck difference does it make if we have a government or not? So then by the default, you become an anarchist in a lot of ways.
Also very wishful thinking, because the majority of people is going to, so we've seen this before, like the shock and release method that's been used for demoralization. Take the Snowden incident, right? It was revealed that the government does spy on you in very invasive ways, the people's reaction was somewhere between outrage and, well, what did you expect? And then, 3 months after, it died down, and the average person didn't care. And the same's going to happen with this. Nobody cares. They don't care.
How much of that is due to us? We're not taking responsibility here.
Oh, no, for sure. But that's the thing.
It's because we're not in Stalinist Russia, and the car doesn't come down and just randomly pick up people in the parking block. Yeah. Yes, exactly. So we're not at that point.
Yeah.
That's a very, I think that's a very big difference.
I think that when we start
messaging in Minecraft, right?
I think that when we start telling ourselves, like, we should be angry about this or we should be angry about that, it just, at some point there will be a breaking point, and whether or not that breaking point comes before or after, like, complete subjugation, that's another question. But, you know, we haven't reached that breaking point yet. Evidently, this is still within the parameters of, like, what the average citizen is willing to tolerate.
I see it a slightly bit different, because I think it takes leadership for people to come to their ideas of what is breaking point. And if we don't get out into these angry mobs of people with bullhorns ourselves, using the maximum potential of our voices and our logic and our pathos to connect with them and steer them in the right direction, I don't think we come to anything. You know what I mean? Because
that's just battle of ideology, isn't it?
Well, in some ways it is, but in other ways it's like it's a battle of souls, right? Because if we have the most powerful ethos in a crowd, people will follow us. That's the way crowds work. That's crowd psychology.
Do you think that ethos is like what guides crowds?
Yes, it absolutely is. Once you
when they brutally like desecrated Mussolini's body, which I'm not talking about the execution, I'm talking about the subsequent desecration that was guided by ethos, or like what?
I think so. I think it was the amount of people.
Ethos.
It was the people,
to like destroying a body, like gratuitous violence. That's ethos.
Yes, I think so. Because once you allow something, then it compounds from there. And when you allow something, that is a level of ethos. For instance, if you look at the desecration of Gaddafi, right? It was because the leaders of that crowd said, this is okay. You can do this. You can get away with this. I'm not going to come down on you for this. And
I don't think that makes it okay, though, to desecrate a dead person.
Okay. I'm saying
I don't think it's a moralistic case that he's trying to make. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
people connect with ethos more than they do with pathos and logos, right? What they're trying to do is they're trying to do what the crowd wants them to do. The crowd's authenticity is based around the idea of authority. Right. So if the authorities in the crowd are saying, yeah, let's go fucking do this, it ends up happening. And a lot of these desecrations and murders and rapes, that happens because of the fact that they're surrounded by people who give them license to do so.
Well, it's because they have the institutional authority to fall back upon, but more so they have these the capacity to manufacture consent in a certain way and in a certain direction. I think that's the problem. John David Eber, if you go to his YouTube channel, he released an amazing video about the statues today. He talked about examples throughout history, such as when when Akhenaten weakened the Egyptian Empire and then the Sea Peoples came. He says that, how did he put it? There is a counter discourses that crop up in society that have a momentum. They are forces of nihilism because they precisely destroy the older order, and that the only way to have what he called the pushback events. For example, when Charles Martel prevented the Muslim Moors from going further into Spain and further into Europe, and of course they were eventually kicked out of Spain. The only way to have that is if you have a surety of someone's identity and someone's place in the world as defending a civilization as such. And I think the problem is that we don't really view it anymore as this, like, as much as a lot of these normie conservatives like Talar or a lot of these libertarians that say that we have to defend Western civilization. I think the problem is that we don't have a sense that we live in a civilization qua civilization to begin with, and that any order that comes about, whether it's a decentralized, chaotic form of nihilism that is just intent to destroy, because they have the virtue of manufacturing consent and manufacturing the various discourses in society.
If you can manufacture pathos and logos, then you can manufacture ethos. And once you have those three, then you've got the crowd.
Yeah, but I think the debate is if they have an ethos to begin with. They probably do in a lot of regards.
I mean, that doesn't really matter whether they have it or not. It's if you impose yours and they go with it, that's all that matters.
Well, yeah.
And
how do you impose
it's the ability to impose it. That's
you strong horse it.
People are blank
start
slates.
Beating people up if they don't go out and hit these.
I mean, no. Strong horse doesn't mean you have to beat them up. Strong horse means you have to give them. So keep in mind, the people that are being led are subpassionaries, and the people leading them are passionary. So think of it biologically, what does it mean? It means that the passionate individual is creating a system for them, and they're embracing that system because they need that system. That's all it means. And to kind of connect what you two are saying with, we got to bring out the mobs and do some hangings in Minecraft and sort of giving ethos to these crowds. The passionate individual creates a system. The passionate individual also destroys the system when the time comes. It's a very self-regulating biological process, or biospiritual, if you want to put it that way.
But I think, but again, that's the problem, is that it seems that any sort of calling for direct action is either a LARP or a Fed post or something of that nature. It's rather
okay. You're talking about it online, right? I'm talking about in real terms, like when you're actually in a crowd of people, how does one person have his voice carry over all the rest? And that's
imagination.
The crowd group psychology is what you have to connect with, and that is a very momentary thing. It's not something.
That's the thing. A passionate individual does have that innately. You highborn gravitas is a thing. That sort of innate charisma.
Listen, it's a gift from Allah. It's divine birthright.
Yeah.
If you look at the looting happens after the cops have started firing on the crowd, right? So what you have in that case is that the loudest, the most controlling voices, the people who are saying to the rest of the people, we have to focus, they start to fall back because they're afraid of the violence. And what ends up happening is the people who are very much the opportunists, who might not necessarily be alphas, become alphas through their looting activity.
But the looting right now, there wasn't that much firing from the police that resulted in the looting.
Well, they were kneeling,
From all the George Floyd protests that were going on, the looting that took place, there wasn't that much firing that the police were doing. In fact, a lot of police were, there was still some resistance, but I don't know, as far as the level of looting.
When you see a 15-year-old kid get shot in the face with a rubber bullet, just one rubber bullet, you're going to want to fuck something up. That's just how it happens.
Yeah, because people act on their emotions. They don't act on their rationality.
Right. And so all it takes is a couple of, look at the American Revolution in Boston. They started firing on the crowd, and that was fucking it. All the 3%er, that they like to talk about, the ones who brought the crowds out, they couldn't do what the British did. The British brought on the revolution because they fired on the crowd. That's how it happens in a crowd dynamic.
But what's interesting right now is that a lot of it is online. So the rubber bullet you're talking about, that's something that people may have seen through social media, even though it may not have been a rubber bullet that was fired in someone within their vicinity. But that still may have been enough to trigger the same response.
Right.
It's not the bullet, though.
What I'd like to add on this.
On the ground, it's different.
First of all, you're absolutely right in the sense that when you're on the ground, it's different. But I would like to add that when you have a population that is desensitized to violence because you overexpose them to it on a daily basis, and this is a problem explicitly brought up by Black Lives Matter activists. They were saying, please stop with the footage of Black people getting killed because it's graphic, it's unnecessary. But beyond that complaint, I think there's the more pertinent psychological aspect. This is desensitizing people. If you expose them over and over and over again to people that look like you or don't look like you getting killed, and you are impotent because you are viewing this from a screen, first of all, this registers in your subconscious exactly the same as if you were to witness it in person. Like, it's the same thing. Second of all, you're forced Despite the fact that your cortisol levels are rising, despite the fact that you're getting an adrenaline pump from this, you're sitting at your desk or in bed or at a chair on your phone or on your laptop. You can do nothing about it. This is like training you to be impotent. No wonder people are anxious.
Yeah, it's the shock and release method. It's the whole. It's the basis of demoralization tactics. You create a crisis and then you let it peter off, and that's it.
Like
exactly.
Like the Yuri Bezmenov, right?
Yeah, what he
there
described as an extremely simple psychological trick, and it's been used again and again.
One person on the news saying, we will continue rioting, we will continue burning down stores until we get rid of qualified immunity, would have changed the entire situation, because that same feeling gets transformed into, this is our goal. What is the goal of fucking BLM at this point? What is it?
Well, it isn't. Like every other movement that started doing something got co-opted and confused. Like take, remember that was many years ago, but when there was those student, what are they called? Tuition riots or whatever.
Oh, they had those in Montreal, yeah.
Occupy Wall Street. That's what it was called. So they started off really strong and they had a really unified message. And then by the end of that whole movement, they had people coming on like morning TV shows and whatever who were supposedly representing the movement, but they were like some weird chick with like pink hair calling herself Ketchup, and then her black boyfriend calling himself Mustard. And they were saying some just absolutely wacky nonsense and just completely discrediting the entire thing.
Yeah. But what's interesting here, though, is that if you have a movement like BLM, from what I understand, the founder is also a Marxist. And even if we go back as far as, let's say...
It's important to say that she's a trained Marxist.
Sure, yeah. But also if we go back to even Rosa Parks, that famous incident, there was a college that Rosa Parks belonged to where they were training Marxist agents to basically go out and do certain things, where the idea that she was proposing, it was a valid one, but it's very unfortunate that a lot of these ideas have been packed together and distributed by people who got money from the Soviet Union. That's the that's the sad part of this whole thing.
So she was a 10th prestige Marxist.
Here's another aspect that I think we're ignoring. The fact that these things can be co-opted and controlled at certain specific points in their maturity, right? And this goes back to the idea of magic, right? Magic is a ritual that has certain steps, right? So when you're looking at movements, you're understanding that at each step you have a certain number of actions you can take, right? And so when you've got an entire group of people out there ready to get rid of the government if they don't comply, and then you can change and transform all of that hatred with a few sentences, then you can change the entire movement. Now, the problem is we don't have enough cohesiveness as liberally minded people who want to have their own self-determination to actually come in and transform the transformation, right? There's no way that we can hijack the alchemy going on. And that's the biggest problem I see. I think that can actually be transformed with a little bit of understanding of how these things happen in the first place.
By the way, I found the Rosa Parks information from this book, Age of Entitlement. So it says over here, one example is Rosa Parks. Over decades, Black History Month have taught millions of school children to think of her as a tired seamstress whose need to rest her weary legs in the white section of a Montgomery, Alabama city bus unleashed a storm of spontaneous protest. But she was considerably more than that. 5 months before the Montgomery bus boycott began, she had attended the Highlander Folk School in Newmarket, Tennessee, an academy that the Congress of Industrial Organizations had set up for training social agitators. She was an organizer of considerable sophistication, one of the intellectual leaders of the Montgomery NAACP chapter. So it's interesting to me to get the background on how all these different things, for all the good things that they wanted to achieve, were also involved in.
All right, well, here's the real thing about Rosa Parks. How many times did she ride the bus before she was finally kicked out of the front?
I don't know.
That's That's an interesting question. It was at least 10 or 20.
So what you're saying is Rosa Parks was a Fed post?
Yes.
Well, in a lot of ways, but I think it's not something you can't learn from. The fact of the matter is you've got to hit them where they're vulnerable so that you can get a massive amount of people behind you. And we don't have people willing to sacrifice themselves in that way. I mean, I'm not. I've got kids. I've got a family. I can't sacrifice myself for the cause, right?
People like a martyr and people like a beautiful story. When you combine the two together, you get just an insane reaction from the pros, I guess, if you want to call it.
Yeah, but
wait,
you're a family man. You have a family. You would be the perfect martyr because you'd be like, oh, this
let's martyr him.
This generous father thinking of his family, the future of his family, providing, making sure they're safe.
Voluntarily.
It's a very emotional and heartwarming sort of a family man.
It's what we call a sob story. Just,
right. But
better than some no-life loser with no life accomplishments laying down dead in the street.
Rosa Parks was an elderly woman. They picked her perfectly.
Of course they did. Yeah. It's a good story.
You see what I'm saying? Right? She's an elderly woman. She didn't have much to lose at that time.
Which is why the family man bit would work, because it's from a different perspective.
Well, yeah, it's from a different perspective that's going to end up hurting my family, which is something I wouldn't volunteer for.
I get what you mean, though.
Food for thought.
But here's the thing. We have crowdfunding. We have the ability to make these people who are willing to sacrifice themselves fabulously wealthy. Why don't we do it?
Yeah, but what do you mean by sacrifice, though? Because it seems the martyr route
because they have to give themselves up over to the state. Like, that's a sacrifice. The state is fucking jaws of terror.
What are we donating money for them to do exactly to martyr? So
remember the Christchurch.
You have to be ready. You have to be ready to say.
Let me set up a GoFundMe for my shooting. Hey guys, can you buy me 10 rounds of 10 magazines of ammunition, please? I'm gonna need a few $100.
It has to be hollow point. It has to be hollow point.
We've already got martyrs. We've already got Duncan Lemp. And we've already got, without Duncan Lemp, I don't think the media would be as scared of the Boogaloo Boys because they're like, hey, these guys have a grievance. They have a fucking grievance that is unarguable. Perfect victim. We have to neutralize them with the narrative about white supremacy. That's why they went after us, is because people started calling themselves Duncan Lemp on all these fucking television stations. It wasn't until after that all these news stations said, oh, white supremacy. So it's already happening, but at the same time, how have we maximized that story? We haven't taken it to the next level because all they're willing to do is say, hey, white supremacy. You have to push them farther. They have to become even more intolerable. How do we get there?
Yeah, but the problem is that with martyr stories is that we lack the capacity to generate a narrative around them. It seems that any sort of quote unquote perfect martyr that goes out there and does something, it doesn't work out at the end. You know what I mean? Like, look at what happened at Charlottesville. My God.
What have we actually done to promote that story? We haven't had anybody arrested for tagging his name across City Hall. We haven't had anybody arrested for tagging his name across an overpass. We haven't had anybody arrested for doing any big fucking thing associated with him, even though we've got it on a couple of podcasts and we've got it on a couple of fucking news stations like fucking Glenn Beck. He talks about it once. Okay, where do we go from there? Is this the movement or is it just incidental? How do we fucking organize these kinds of things? Because it's very important for us to see these things as sea changes. If we can use this event to make sure it never happens again, we can start to make changes in the right direction. But I don't think we're willing to do that. That takes a lot more coordination than we've demonstrated.
What do you think about what Mencius Moldbug talked about in regards to whenever there is anything that is antagonizing this giant cathedral force that has been here for an incredibly long amount of time, whatever you're talking about regarding any kind of attempt at martyrdom, the reaction from the media, regardless of whether or not, you could have somebody who is absolutely, just a very good person who's just standing up for his beliefs, but because they're just a white male, that is enough to render them completely useless to anybody to pay attention to as far as the media goes, or vice versa, to make them a villain, and which has been going on.
He's not understanding the picture he's trying to paint, right? Because when they go overboard, other people see it, right? When they go out and they say, this is all bullshit because he's a fucking white male. He's a 21-year-old white male. He had all the privilege in the world. And when he died, that's nothing to pay attention to. When I say that, it gets your blood boiling. And their overreaction is the reaction we want, right?
Yeah, well, that doesn't change anything, though.
No,
the average person,
the
average person does
what the
not
fuck
care.
Is going on?
The average person does not do that.
They've been saying what the fuck is going on for a long time. They've been saying
for 20 years. The conservatives have been saying this, that if the left overreacts, then we're gonna have our moment. It's like, well, the left is overreacting right now, and nobody gives a fuck.
They
right?
Never never seize the opportunity to act on the
there's
overreaction.
No leadership in the white. Right.
You're putting a lot of you're putting a lot of faith into the average person. The average person is an imbecile.
Okay,
I agree.
That's true.
I'm an imbecile.
That's true. But we're talking about day-to-day fucking news cycles here, and if we can dominate it for a couple of days, and
it's not going to change anything.
See it.
We've had obscene things in the news for months at a time.
Think of the 2016 election, how momentous
and they get memory
that
hold,
was.
and that's it. Yeah.
Who are these people?
Election. Do you remember the energy on election night 2016?
Oh yeah, you could feel it.
Yeah, that was the highest energy that I've probably felt in my life in terms of like feeling it off of a crowd, off of like the internet, off of an entire nation, the entire freaking world. And it didn't go anywhere. Where did it go?
The thing is, you're trying to operate within the system. You can't do that.
Well, no, the problem is the news cycle in general. It's the consciousness that it invokes, that you always have a spectacle to look at, and that the previous spectacle is discarded. Like, do you guys remember what's the guy's name, the Vegas shooter that nobody cares about anymore? What was his name? Oh yeah, you can't remember it.
Stephen Paddock.
What was it?
Stephen Paddock. There you go.
But here's the thing. What was it? We still have people on the right talking about the kid who was confronted by the Native American and how much that was overblown by the media. Those type of things do resonate, right?
But they don't actually resonate. They only resonate in your echo chamber. Ask anybody who's a normie about that event. They're going to be saying, "What kid? What Native American? What?"
Or they'll say he's a racist, right?
Or they'll say that
still believe that he is.
But much more likely is they won't care.
They won't even know.
How many weeks ago was this?
This was months ago. This was years ago, dude. This is ancient. Nobody cares. It's so far gone. The thing is, you can't throw hands with somebody so much heavier than you. Like the media, whatever.
It seems like what you're saying is that the heaviest hands come from the apathetic majority.
Well, there are no hands there. Like the thing is, you're trying to throw hands.
That's not an agent. Yeah. The majority is not an agent. Why do you think that the majority is an agent? It doesn't have a free will.
It doesn't. They just go at the whims of like the strong horse.
Yeah,
and until you can become the strong horse, you can't do anything.
That's what you described earlier, like the fact that the crowd can be guided with an ethos. It needs a leader. The crowd itself, the silent majority, it only works if someone's like willing to like meme it and co-opt it. But like it by itself doesn't have a head, it doesn't have eyes, and it doesn't have a mouth. And the problem with like a leader is that it's very difficult to bring up someone who can face off against all this simply just based on resources. He gets drowned in money. That's what happens. Any movement that like actual movement that picks up gets drowned in money, gets bought out. It gets everything around it gets bought out.
Well, I guess from my perspective, because I have seen a lot of momentum pick up in that direction personally, I would say that, at the very least in my circles, in the small ones that I travel in, I'm starting to see a result. So
for sure, no, like I'm not saying that there's no like movement among people who can think. That's for sure. But these people are nothing. Sort of
like a progressive. Well, I mean, how do you say a person is nothing, right? I mean, who is nothing if you can steer and guide things in the right direction? What the problem is how do you get to that point where these people can start becoming effective in production, right? I mean, producing results.
No, but I think that's the issue.
And what are the results that we want to produce? Do we want to produce outrage or do we want to produce more freedom?
The thing is, as soon as you start to produce and it goes against the establishment, you get shut down so quickly. Like
Perhaps maybe they're dependent on you as much as you are on them.
I would like to
they really don't.
I would like to get the input of Steel Archer, by the way. Steel Archer, thank you so much for joining us. So Steel, I don't know how much you were listening to the conversation, but as far as being able to, let's say, become a martyr or resist any of the elements of the, let's say, radical left or whatever you want to call it, whatever machine would be stifling freedom in the years to come, where do you see things going?
Yeah, sorry, I haven't been listening to the show before this. I couldn't find it. But listen, so the topic is the radical left is rising, anti-freedom element is rising, and you're asking for solutions to mitigate against that?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So first, I think one of the interesting things is you really have to understand their mindset. And when we live in a dualistic sort of mindset where society starts to break down into dualities, you understanding them is a very good thing to do. And I think what the left and the neo left is doing is they're basing it on sort of Marxist oppressor type thinking. So in a normal Marxist world, it's quite a simple concept. It's classist, right? It's I'm poor, you're rich, therefore you're oppressing me because you have more money equals more power. And then because you have more money and power, you build up a system to maintain yourself in that spot. And that's kind of that's where Marxism was born, Karl Marx and all that, Friedrich Engels and stuff, because, you know, in the industrial class was, in a way, it looked pretty horrible. I mean, kids crawling up chimneys and dying, people losing limbs in factory equipment. I mean, like you kind of see today overseas, where labor laws are ridiculously bad, and there's no robotics and stuff like that, and people get chewed up in machines making clothes and stuff, or are dying of chemical poisoning in their water and stuff like that. But it's moved on since then. The theory has moved on, and they're redefining it in neo-Marxism to anything that differentiates one set of people or a group of people to another. So, for example, you're a man, I'm a woman, therefore historically men have had more power, therefore you're an oppressor, I'm oppressed. And it doesn't matter what I've done. It doesn't matter if you're the most benevolent man that ever lived. You're still the oppressor because you're in a group of oppressors that have historically oppressed people. And then these groups systematically get smaller and smaller and smaller, but they still run along the lines of destroying all power groups. So that's why you see them running into the family, into marriages. That's why you see them running into the state and meddling.
Well, hang on a second. I think that's a little bit of defeatism, because a lot of people I've talked to while I've gone out to these BLM protests don't want anything to do with the type of communism that these guys are pushing. Like, that's why they've stalled. That's why they've stopped at a certain point. They haven't been able to pass any of these laws. They haven't been able to push that popular narrative against these ideas.
They rock the boat very, very gently. That's the thing.
Yeah,
they have time on their hands.
It's mainly the theory that I'm discussing. Now, you can play these out into whatever different groups you want. So, for example, in a neo-Marxist context, in the sense of Black Lives Matter, the oppressor is the police. The oppressed is the black minorities, or all people against the oppressive police. But the police is part of a greater system, a neo-feudal system that supports the state of the United States of America, right? So that's kind of how you have to think about it, and that's why in New York de Blasio and stuff defunded the police by $1 billion just to buy these guys off. Now, you can play these out in any way you want, but you have to understand that it's oppressed versus oppressor, and you can't escape. You cannot never escape. So as you perpetuate forward, these groups will go from big groups to smaller and smaller groups that undermine, whether they like it or not. They even undermine their own foundations. They undermine the own foundations of the systems and countries that they live in. So you'll see it continually emerging, continually evolving. It's the same as a sort of rabid progressivism. You can't stop it, because once it's in motion, the groups get more and more extreme. And so this is why, conservatives, for example, there's still, gay marriages going out the window. They can't even talk about that anymore. And it's moved on to more extreme groups. And if you don't accept the more extreme groups, then you're somehow behind. Do you know what I mean? And older generations cannot keep up at all.
That sort of undermines their underlying goal. That's what I'm trying to say, is that they don't have any underlying principles. So therefore, none of their actual goals are ever going to be implemented. All it is constant cycle of introducing more infiltration into their own groups. It's almost like diluting
perpetuating
it, essentially.
In the background, I'm not sure who that is.
It was Anarchy Ball, I believe.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll be on, the music may be a little bit. I don't know if there is any way to lower the volume on that one, just because it's a little bit too much.
You'll get algorithm.
Yeah,
flagged.
I wish. Well, no, I think it'll be.
Sorry
all right.
about that.
No problem.
My 2-year-old was watching a video.
No, that's okay.
The reason it
that's
doesn't.
all right.
I understand exactly what you're saying, and the reason it doesn't look like a cohesive group with a bunch of united principles is because it isn't. It's because once this theory is out of the box, once it's out there, then all of the groups with the same oppressed feeling grab onto these tactics and utilize these tactics in a way that subverts all the structures that they feel oppresses them, which why it looks so random. Which, like conservatives like Ben Shapiro, or you pick your conservative. This is why they can sit around and they can debunk each individual group and their nonsense, or whatever they perceive it to be, all day, every day. And it looks funny because it's like, how is this black guy with a BML standing next to this white one, who's transsexual, even though these ones want to kill these ones and these ones hate these, but they're all standing there as a united group against, because it's oppressor, and they have to go after each target that they feel is the most foundationally oppressive against them. You knock that one over, and then you can advance from there.
What I'm saying is through my experience and what I've seen, because I've gone to these protests, I've talked to the protesters, I've led these protests, I've seen that you can be more effective through providing coherence than they can through creating incoherence. And I think a lot of people are missing that fact. And I saw so many more people starting to speak out against the lockdown, starting to rise up, get out their rifles, go down to the State House with their rifles because of the fact that they thought the lockdown was unconstitutional, than I ever saw them ever do for George Floyd. And in not getting active, in not taking the reins and making a coherent argument, they've essentially lost their own arguments against the lockdown. They've lost everything, because these two things could have come together for a much bigger purpose, but they didn't even try, because it was tainted with the ideology of the left off the bat, and that turned people off from showing up. I don't think anarchy is ever going to come about by purpose. If you look at Somalia, my favorite example, Somalia came about because the communist government collapsed in Somalia, right? And so they had no other choice. They had to turn to anarchism, and they had
Is it
the most
really
growth.
anarchy though? It's more like a feudal warlord system.
If you look at the original, look at the original, look at the original system of governance that they had before there was anything there. They had a series of tribal elders. They had people who would adjudicate tribal conflicts. Well, here's the thing. You would only need adjudication if you went to them, right? They didn't come to you. They were not a police force. You would only go to them when you needed a service. They don't come to you. So, I mean, I think it's a little different because there is a service involved.
Yeah, but I mean, they still had warlords that would systematically starve people and control the UN food aid and things like that. That's why the Americans won.
Who
Somalia.
is the U.S. funding right now? Who did they originally get rid of, and then turn around and aid? It's not really a question. Once the Islamic Courts Union, which is ZIR, which is anarchy, which is the idea that you come to your elders when you need them as a service, those people took over Somalia, right? In that takeover, they said, if you want to do something, come to us if you need us. They didn't say, come to us and we'll take over you. That warlord mentality, that was not the Islamic Courts Union. That's what the U.S. funded to take over from the Islamic Courts Union. I mean, if you look up the phrase "better off stateless" on Google, you'll find the entire history laid out in excruciating detail.
But
what ended up happening was the U.S. funded these guys, and they came back and destroyed them. That's what happened.
But before the U.S. funded them,
if the U.S. was not involved, the Islamic Courts Union would still have.
They wouldn't. The country would be starving, and warlords would appear just within.
There's always going to be
absolutely incorrect. The communists were the ones who started the warlordism. The Islamic Courts Union were the agrarians. All right. These were the people who were producing the stuff. The warlords didn't produce anything. The warlords were kicked out into Ethiopia. That's when the Islamic Courts Union took over for 3 years. That's what happened. The U.S. funded them after they were kicked out.
So before the U.S. there was
20
zero
years of bombing.
Before the U.S. there was zero corruption.
There were.
I have
Came
a question.
out of the communist system. These were the bureaucrats. The bureaucrats of the communist system became the warlords. They got kicked out, and then you have.
But before the communist system, because
I would like to ask a little bit more about this agrarian system. How does this agrarian system work? Was it like a pacifist system? How did they ensure labor in this agrarian society that you're describing?
What do you mean? You saying how did people work? People worked because they had farms. They only came to the Islamic courts.
I'm asking, when you look at an agrarian society and you're talking about it, was it individual family farms, or was it landowners with slaves working that land? There's a pretty big difference.
But they didn't have slaves in Somalia. That wasn't a Somali concept.
If you put a gun to someone's head and you tell them to plow your land, they'll do it. I'm asking you, is that the case or not?
No, they didn't do that. It was people who had farms, had families on those farms. They worked, and then they passed those traditions down to the subsequent generations.
What technology and infrastructure were they using?
Hand tools?
Wait, so one second. Here's an article, Slavery in Somalia. So slavery in Somalia existed as part of the Arab slave trade.
What's the date on that?
Okay, let's see. The trade routes of medieval Africa. So they're talking about the medieval times over here. So between
medieval times, we're talking about the 3 years of anarchism in Somalia, the 3 years that the Islamic Courts Union fought against the United States, the biggest superpower in the world.
So from 1800 to 1890, between 25,000 to 50,000 Bantu slaves are thought to have been sold from the slave market of Zanzibar along the Somali coast. Most of the slaves were from...
How does that have to do with the 3 years after communism collapsed?
It doesn't, but if we're talking about a system that was in place before communism went in there...
Look, ZIR had to do... Have you guys looked up ZIR?
The only thing so far I know about ZIR is that it's a preferred pronoun for some of the SJWs, but that's...
Okay, no, it's XEER. It is the Islamic Courts Union preferred method of governance where you've got 2 tribes. If there's a conflict between the tribes or between the people, they go to the elders and they ask them for the help to adjudicate. If there's a victim, that these 2 tribes come together and decide that there's been wrongdoing, then one side is owing the other side in a sort of insurance basis. So your family sort of represents you. Now, we can update that with how people subscribe to certain things today, right? That's the idea behind anarcho-capitalism. So if you subscribe to an insurance service, then you're insuring yourself against damages in the future. So, right? So you're paying a certain amount of dues to a service. You can leave if you feel like, and then, pass that on to the others. This is why Zaire sort of took over after the communist government, because they had no capital, they had nothing. Now they have one of, if not the best, cell phone networks in Africa, because of the fact that they allowed the free market to prosper.
Yeah, but I mean, come on, Somalia is kind of like
a
terrible example. Wouldn't you
also
agree?
until the 20th
I'm not moving
century,
there anytime soon.
Until the 20th century, they had slavery, and
I
don't think
it's
that's
not
something
a terrible
we can...
example. It's not a terrible example when you take it in context. That's the problem.
Well, what I want to understand,
in context, they're doing better than Ethiopia. In context, they're doing better than their neighbors, despite the fact that they've been war torn for so long.
Okay, I would like to ask a question because I'm really interested to understand the situation a bit better. On one hand, you're talking about hand tools and like for agriculture, so you're talking about a system with like no infrastructure whatsoever. I'm imagining people living next to their fields and probably shitting next to them too, eating what they're making year by year, not having even a storage system. On the other hand, you're talking about what, like a cellular network? Who installed that? So that's what I'm asking. Like, what does the infrastructure there look like? Because you're describing on one hand like a utopian group, and on the other hand, it's like mud.
Okay,
so
well, you're gonna have to do your own research on that, because there's a lot of history. There was several years where cell phone networks were able to compete freely in their markets, and it was only until after the U.S. imposed a unified centralized government that they created anti-competition laws on their cell phone service.
I'm not asking about like the laws. I'm asking more about like the physical towers and the like people owning cell phones to even use these
Sophia,
systems.
Africa is like a fever dream in that sense. It's a insane combination of like archaic.
Yeah.
Well, of course, but I want to understand a little bit better what this physically looks like, because I'm hearing like the union of two polar opposites,
Looks
and if we're going to talk about well, I want to understand what this ass looks like. If we're going to talk about anarchy being a viable system, I'd love to understand how we can have like,
but it's not
because
you
this
can't call it
this agrarian society, if it's centralized, probably implies a distribution of power that is very unequal.
Yeah,
you're probably dealing with slavery,
regardless
of whether or not you admit it.
1%, so I'm gonna have to get going.
Yeah,
it was nice talking to you guys. We'll talk about
Godspeed. I love you.
several other things. No, seriously, look up Better Off Stateless. You can see how Somalia did versus their neighbors during the time when you could say that they were stateless. If you don't look that up, then I guess we have no room for comparison. But at the same time, technology flowed in. They were able to increase their happiness level to better than all the rest of Africa, which I guess, if we're going to talk about the happiness level of Northern Europe under socialism, then I guess we have to talk about the happiness level of Somalia under anarchism, right? So if we're going to go from that perspective, look up Better Off Stateless, look up the happiness level of Somalia, and then look up the subsequent American intrusions into their systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anarchy Ball. Thank you for coming in.
What a nice guy.
I still can't call it anarchism because tribal politics is not anarchy.
It's chaos. It's not like anarchy. It's not a political system. It's literally just chaos, is it not?
But it's not chaos, not at all.
How is that chaotic? It's super organized. It's more strictly organized than like your college.
Because I imagine just Africa, just like, I know nothing about it. That's why I kind of
ties of blood are like way stronger than they would be here. So, if you want to like get married across borders that are considered like a feud, you're not going to do that.
And like you consider, the words of your second uncle and then your third uncle and your fourth uncle on your mother's side, as opposed to like your father's side. Like it's the rules and like regulations surrounding tribal politics are insane and like very complex. And people who bastardize them and just boil it down to like, there's like this weird misconception of the Bronze Age being like me, big man, grug, stick, hit you on head, bruh.
No. The Bronze Age is a very sophisticated age.
It's extremely sophisticated.
Yes.
And And
Probably
like tribal
it's,
politics are also
it's more sophisticated in many ways than the classical
For sure.
era, especially the late Bronze Age.
For sure, because like
Allow
they
me-
had
yeah.
they had like a spiritual blood relation layer to politics, and like there were many layers.
But the one thing that I don't think Anarchy Ball touched on was that the system that he was talking about. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but looking it up, the pre-communist system, for all the bad things that communism offered, it was a system where there was slave labor of the Bantus, and that was going on for a very long time, up until like the 1930s, I believe.
Are you sure? Are you sure Bantu slaves are not Bantus actually enslaving people? Because the Bantus have a pretty long history of enslaving
No,
everyone.
absolutely. But if we're talking specifically about the Somalians, I was just reading the article here right now as you guys were talking. They're talking about the Bantu
so they're
slaves.
using Bantu slaves.
Yeah.
Okay.
I tell you the reason that I've never subscribed to the anarchy point of view in terms of having it as a state that works is because other people in other regions, let's say, for example, you do say Somalia, well, the Iranians or the Jews or the Turks or the Egyptians or some of these other long-run civilizations, and the Somalis have been around forever. They've had kingdoms well in the past, thousands of years ago. So they're a long-run civilization as well. But other people and other groups who know themselves as cohesive national groups, if you actually did get your anarchist state, all you're ever going to be complaining about is these other people from somewhere else coming in and conquering you all the time. And I think this is something I always hear with anarchists. It's, we had a great town going and we were doing anarchy stuff, and then the government came in, which is a collective group of people who are doing different things, and they stomped us out of existence. Or,
wrote Java.
Or, there was anarchy post World War II in Germany or in communist Russia, or what you can name your stuff. And then somebody somewhere started to collectively organize stuff, and it's it's a power gap, and there's
Anarchy
different
is weak.
scenarios of how that runs.
But it's
And
also what you mean by anarchy, because most anarchists wouldn't even consider anarcho-capitalism a form of anarchy, because anarchy has always been explicitly anti-capitalist in a lot of ways, right? Because they say that capitalism is a driving engine towards centralization, which they are kind of correct. I mean, come on, like.
What if you talk to Jeff Berwick, who's the one of the most well-known anarchists on the internet? He's only anarcho-capitalist. He just wants a system of corporations that run around as profit-seeking entities in cryptocurrency land to dominate the globe. And he's got the real tether on anarchy right now as we speak. I mean, that might be changing. That might change in a day. He might die. I don't know. But right now, it's all about corporate anarchy, right?
Yeah, and we in some ways
that's not even anarchy.
Yeah, we already have like semi-corporate anarchy to begin with. I mean, this is what I think we sort of touched upon in the last topic, but I think we've sort of moved from that, but we've come full circle in that. In a lot of ways, the systems in place are designed to be specialized and compartmentalized to the point where the raw energy of the masses are almost irrelevant now in certain ways. And we see this with elite overproduction. We have systems that are so reified in their operation that in a lot of ways, the thumos of the masses is almost like a non-entity nowadays, because the masses, we can afford a system where the vast majority of people don't have any particular skill or gravitas or knowledge base, but just rather, watch Netflix all day or something else. But as long as they're efficient workers and cogs in the system, things will go along just fine. Even voting is sort of like a passé thing that's a ritual that's not even a ritual at this point. So that's what sort of neutralizes a lot of discourse around populism, is that the masses are almost completely irrelevant in actual political functioning, at least in my opinion. I could be wrong.
True. You're absolutely right. The masses are useless. They're only relevant when you direct them at something.
It's because of specialization. It's the same in South Korea. The more specialized your economy becomes, the less useful each individual becomes, except for their own usefulness. Do you know what I mean?
And this is not a new idea. Like Steel Archer, I don't know if you know about the concept. I know Nick Land talked about it, but I think it came from Spandrel, the concept of the IQ shredder, and how Singapore is like the perfect IQ shredder, with specialization plus capital moving the best and brightest people upwards, and they don't have any kids, obviously. And so then you have a system where the vast majority of people have like been robbed of their. Of course, there's problems with it. I don't exactly agree with like this, IQ objectivist like HBD stuff. I think there's limitations to that, but it's certainly interesting in the long run. These like long form trends of IQ in society,
like a
think-
idiocracy.
I totally agree. You're talking about a tiny little civilization, like a little city state that's so far advanced along its course that it's a petri dish of what a larger society like America would become if it went on that trajectory for 10,000 years or something.
Yeah, and like I say, I think IQ is an imperfect metric. Obviously, there's a lot of problems with it. I'm not exactly like a Wignat or anything, but it's true.
IQ is created. It's not a natural law. IQ is a man-made measuring unit.
Right, but it measures a natural phenomenon, though.
That is true.
But the interesting,
there's a genetic basis for IQ. I don't know why that's so controversial. I know. Well, sorry, I know why it's controversial.
But the
I just don't think the genetics are every part.
But the interesting question for me is when it comes to willpower, and when it comes to willpower being encouraged by other people in your society, regardless
low time preference.
Regardless of what IQ you happen to be in or what level of society you happen to be in, I think that is a very interesting thing for me, to have somebody to be able to go against the grain and be able to, through their own willpower, like we were talking before about even your physiognomy ends up changing when you adopt certain habits. So I think that we are very flexible and that we are very plastic if we have the will to power to change ourselves. And that is something that I believe in very much, that potential. As far as how many people are going to do it, I don't know. But
I think only a passionary can be flexible that way. And be that plastic.
What's a passionary?
It's your driving. So biologically, if you take humanity and you turn it into like a, how do I put this? Passionaries are agents, and subpassionaries are your, I guess, participants or
worker drones.
Yeah, something like that. So you have, if you take, for example, ethnogenesis, which is like the creation of an ethnos or a certain population, you have a stressor event usually that forces your passionate individuals, which is just like your chaotic humans, take your Paleolithic man, right? Mm-hmm. These are, for the most part, they were passionaries. So something happens, it gets cold, they need to get together because they have to work together. So together they optimize a system. They go, oh, we should be a tribe. So then they develop this tribe. And then from this tribe, as it gets more complex and more efficient and more stable, it allows for the existence of subpassionaries, which are kind of your lesser man. They could never form a system. They exist purely from the system.
It's the hard times create strong men, weak times create
something
good times
like
create
that.
Weak men.
Yeah, but like on a purely like quorum sensing gene expression level.
Yeah.
And then
By
eventually,
the way, can I just say this is really interesting because I know it's a little bit different, but I actually just finished reading Brave New World, the Huxley book. That was crazy. That freaking exploded my mind, and yeah, that was nuts.
Well, it's interesting about the Huxleys how we had not Aldous Huxley, but another one of the Huxleys being connected to Charles Darwin's family. And
Julian?
Yes.
Julian, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting just to go down that rabbit hole for me as far as the perception that we have of us as Homo sapiens in this world, and how, like, I'm not really going to get in on it right now because I'm not prepared to. I still have a lot of research to do. But I think that, like I was talking about in an earlier podcast, there is a lot more to humanity than meets the eye. And
for sure.
Yeah, ultimately, I think that we are, and I know that someone like Alexander Bard would disagree with me on this, but I think that we are.
I would call you a Gnostic romanticist
yes,
or whatever.
exactly. But I really think that we are beings. We are beings of light and beings of thought, and that thought can solidify into forms that it gets into the habit of inhabiting. And I think that there is, like, I wouldn't view going out into the astral realm or something like that as being escaping Earth. Especially today, I think that something like that is actually absolutely critical and necessary for the technological apocalypse that may be coming our way, so that people don't become wireheads. At least not everybody becomes wireheads, and there are people who are going to be able to train certain faculties that they've lost touch with as far as the majority of human beings, and that are losing touch with them. And that is something.
There you go. That's your passionate individuals. They exist purely to adjust and move forward the human system. Like that's their biological purpose.